I think the bigger opportunity are for, the specialty multi-retailers, the big retailers, the big boxes out there that are sitting on top of so much data. And, we've done work in past lives for, one of the two biggest specialty multi-companies and retailers out there. And it was amazing and embarrassing at the same time how much data they had and how much data they did not understand how to use. And so I think this is where the real opportunity is for everyone. If they wake up and figure out how to actually take advantage of that and, get out of these loyalty programs that are basically like, oh, people like you bought this, or like people who also bought this, like you have so much data to now think about connecting, and how do you connect that to the other things I do in my life and get beyond like these superficial attributes. You can make my shopping experience feel as if it is with a concierge and completely bespoke. Like you're sitting on tens of millions of loyalty members with, hundreds and hundreds of transactions to still have these kind of incredibly antiquated shopping models and algorithms is kind of embarrassing. And so that's, for them a huge opportunity, and for their competitors an even bigger opportunity to figure out how do they start to build some of those models and kind of compete and steal people away in that process. And that gets you into some of the, kind of AIO or GAO, however you want to think about it, and kind of what shopping and e-com involved in AI looks like.
Hello, I'm Mike Ryan. I'm the Chief Networking Officer at PIMS, and welcome to our second season of Minutes with Mike. Now in my 33rd year at PIMS, I've had the privilege of partnering with companies both large and small, supporting their PR and marketing through customized fulfillment and distribution that delivers measurable impact on their brand perception, boosts positive affinity, and fuels their overall brand performance. And throughout my career, I've had the chance to work alongside many talented folks. This is their story. On this show, we'll sit down with some of the world's top marketing and business thought leaders to learn more about their success, how they got there, how marketing helped them achieve their goals, what strategies they used, and what inspires them. Please join me on this journey as we learn from those who are changing the way we think about business. So sit back, enjoy. You're listening to Minutes with Mike. Welcome, everybody, to Minutes with Mike. Today's very special guest, Mr. Chaz Giles. Welcome to the program, Chaz.
Thank you. Great to be here.
In every single episode I've ever done, and I'm up over 60 plus episodes now, nice. we talk about AI at some point. So we are going to pick that apart, and you're going to see how little that I know about it. We're going to learn how much you know about it. But Chaz is the CEO of Lita Labs currently. He's a founder. He's an AI strategist. If somebody were to ask you, because it happens to me, Chaz, all the time, like if somebody says to you, what do you do? What is it you do? What do you say? Because when they ask me, it's like a 20-minute answer. And then at the end of it, they're like, what?
Yeah, it's funny. It's like, so my girlfriend used to say, and she'd laugh at me. She's like, no one understands what you do when you tell them. So like, she always yells at me to like, try to get it more concise. So I think in like the most crisp way I could say it is, we basically help businesses figure out how to turn AI into results. Like that's the simplest way. There's lots of other details that go behind that, but at the simplest form, it's just, there's this really great technology. Everyone's super excited about it. Nobody knows what to do with it. And we really kind of play that in between to say, hey, you have the strategy, you run this business. How do we help you use this technology to go farther, faster, cheaper, better, whatever the goal is, and really turn and harness that technology for where you and your business are going?
We're going to dive deeper into that, but I did find a quote. I think I found it on the website. I'm not sure, but it says, AI consultancy that closes the gap between leaders seeking AI transformation and vendors selling hype. And I love it. I cut, pasted, and I was like, I have to read that on the podcast.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, there's just you see it, right? Like you said, almost every conversation you have comes back to something in AI, and so much of it, let's be frank, so much of it is just BS, right? There's people that are just hype cycles. It's, AI can do this, AI is going to solve every problem, no company's going to need employees. It's just like all that kind of stuff. And it's really hard for people, leaders, businesses, whoever you are, to just kind of cut through all that hype to actually get down to like, what does this do for me?
The great part about your world is it feels like it just started yesterday, right? Like AI, and I used 2% of it, and I think I use AI. So it feels like it just started. But like, as I was reading through your LinkedIn profile, your resume, that word innovation kept popping up. And I know you
Yeah.
started corporate world at P&G, right? And you were working on, was Tide or different
Yeah, I
laundry
had fabric, very, very nice. I had fabric care. So I had Tide and
fabric
Gain
care, right?
and Bounce. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah,
Some staples of the laundry room.
take me back, right? So you're in high school, you're in college. Somebody said to you like, "Hey, they're working on this thing now called AI," or have you ever thought about this? How did it start with you?
Yeah, I mean AI was a little bit farther down the road for me. I think my journey really started more innovation. Like I've always liked kind of solving problems. As you said, I started my career at Procter and Gamble. It's an amazing training ground. They do, incredible things. But I was about a year and a half in and kind of quickly realized big corporate was not my cup of tea. And so I was actually kind of leaving to go to kind of early stage medical devices company doing some really interesting work. And, they talked me into staying because they had a group called FutureWorks, which was kind of their upstream corporate development working on really cool new things. And so I got to lead, work that was happening in low income, bottom of the pyramid type consumers trying to figure out how to combine clean drinking water, remote diagnostics, rapid point of care therapeutics with consumer products, right? Like model. And it was that kind of moment of like, okay, this is the stuff that really just like lights my fire in terms of building things, solving problems, solving really, really hard problems that kind of matter. And so I was there for, another 3, 5 years, something like that. And then kind of moved over into more venture capital, kind of corporate innovation at Citi Ventures, which is Citibank's, Citigroup's venture capital arm. Started my first venture backed company after that. And that kind of, dovetailed in. So I've always been, as you said, you saw innovation kind of peppered throughout as probably like the through line in a lot of my career and resume, but it was always around building things, solving problems, and a lot of that was focused on technology. And so as AI started to evolve, but like AI, as you said, it feels like it's really new, but it's been around for a long time. It was, data, and then it was, big data, then it was a lot of the, statistical models, and that's just really kind of evolved into what is today's world with some of the, really big advances in LLMs and agentic systems and things like that. So it's always just been around technology, and it was kind of a natural fall in. There was a specific company that we built all around AI, and it was my co-founder that really pulled me deep into that world. But we can get into that a little bit more later. But that was kind of how we got here.
It's interesting to see too how those, the path that you take or the steps that you take, they're almost accidentally on purpose, right? Like the
Yeah,
the way it's kind of progressed. And, again, from the outside looking in and just reading it, I'm like, oh, I can see, of course, this
yeah.
leads to this, which led to this, which
I
led to
mean, I
that.
tell people in hindsight, like I can draw a line, straight line through my career in hindsight, and it looks very deliberate. Like in the moment, not so much. I think in the moment, it was very much move toward things that I like, do more of things that I like and less of things that I don't. And that just kind of took me on this natural path. And it was interesting, right? Because I've faced the challenge that I think a lot of people struggle with, especially ones who started maybe in a more corporate path and then decide they want to get more into entrepreneurial road. It's really hard leaving that. Right. So, I was at Procter and Gamble. I was at Citigroup. I was a VP at Lauder running innovation. Those are good jobs, good money, good career paths. And, 2 times in my career, I basically just walked away from that, right? Went from, making very nice money and living a very good life to making no money for 12 months while I built my next company. And so those kind of moments, when people are looking at you doing that step of like, wait, I'm sorry, you're leaving the biggest inflection point in terms of, age and career of what sets you on earning power to go do what? And you kind of jump. But those were the moments that I looked at it and basically said, look, I can't look up, and if I'm doing the same thing that I'm doing right now in 10 years from now, I will never be able to get rid of that regret, right? I'll never be able to look and answer that question like, what if? And some of those things worked, some of those things didn't, but they all put me in the spot that I am now, which I'm very grateful for because it put me right on this kind of bleeding edge of what's happening in AI and things like that. And that was really a product of the last company that we founded, which was an AI dermatology company doing some really, really interesting work and kind of frontier technology with imaging and neural networks before people really had a vocabulary, around AI. And so then we were trying to explain what that was, hence people telling me no one understands what you do, Chess. So.
Well, I was going to ask you that later, but now that you bring it up, so I read that too. I'm like AI dermatology. Like what is that?
Yeah, so I mean, so a lot of people have heard about precision medicine, and you may have heard that, right? Which is basically people develop, drugs and different treatments, all based on your own body, your own immune system, and that's kind of the future of medicine. It's this idea of you're not a number, you're not like everyone else. So how do we create treatments and treatment plans for you, Mike, right? And we said, hey, why does this not exist in skincare? Why does this not exist in dermatology? Why are we dealing with products that are formulated for everyone when I know my skin is unique to me, right? In so many ways. And so we created basically the ability to measure skin and skin biology through a mobile phone. We brought like $1 million worth of clinical measurements that we could now measure and infer from your smartphone's camera. And so that was like, the first big technology jump. And then the second one was we were then able to connect that to formulations. And so we could manufacture over 3,000 skincare formulations on demand, right? So it was basically map your unique skin physiology and then connect that to the right ingredients at the right time. And that was that was kind of the big vision. And we did a lot of that really, really well. We were just really early in that game. And so trying to kind of explain what this was and how this works and wait, how can my phone do all this? This was a pre-ChatGPT kind of vocabulary that everyone had. And so that was, really what tripped us up in a bit of timing.
It's so fascinating that it's actually frightening, right? And I second, with all due respect, because like I don't know the first thing about like facial recognition or any of that stuff, but like, I've gone to events where people are like, stick your head in this facial, platform. They cover your head up, and then there's a series of strobe lights and you come out of it, and it tells you not only A, what deficiencies you have on your face, but B, which ones can be problematic and which ones can be identified. And then C, what products you should buy, in the marketplace. It's, of course, it makes such sense, but I'm also like shook by it. Like,
yeah, it is. It's crazy what technology can do. And that was one of the big challenges. Now imagine being able to do all of that from your phone, just
it's
like you're
crazy.
taking a selfie, right? So, yeah.
I know at Estee, you built external, you're involved in external innovation, including 100 million plus innovation pipeline, dealing with partnerships, acquisitions, incubations. Big questions supporting beauty in general. What do they get right with this sort of technology, and what are they moving too slowly on, in your opinion?
I think you have to kind of divide beauty a little bit, right? So you have some companies that are much more forward thinking and progressive and how they're adopting technology, how they experiment. And then, you have kind of the new wave of indie brands that are kind of pushing the envelope as it relates to social media technologies, as it relates to formulations and things like that. So I think you have to kind of divide the industry a little bit into those who are trying to lead and those who are kind of staying status quo. I think within the status quo, especially as it relates to AI and a lot of the legacy players, right? So your traditional, big beauty houses, there is a false sense of security, I think, that exists because of the power of their brand and moving just way too slow. And so they're looking at this technology like they've looked at many others in the past, and they have, 18, 24, 36-month plans for a technology that is doubling in capability every 3 to 6 months. And it's just not sustainable. And so they are very quickly going to get outpaced by their much smaller competition. In that end, the value of a brand will always be there, but the definition of a brand will fundamentally be different. What it takes to support that brand will be different. So your brand can still be incredibly valuable, but if it takes you 100 people to run that brand to service 1,000 consumers, and I can do that with 2 people and 10 agents to service 1,000 consumers, I have much more ability to invest in my customer acquisition, to, kind of put value into my product, to deliver performance. And that's where it's going to get kind of unsustainable for a lot of big companies.
There's a quote I found from you that was another great one. And you said, it's like tying a rocket engine onto a horse, right? And
Yeah.
that really
Yeah.
puts it in perspective because, you know, again, just being naive to the process, that's exactly what I do, right? Like I try to jump 4,000 steps. I'm
Yeah.
not even sure why I'm using it, in my personal life and my professional life. I think I want to use it for this purpose, but I'm not even really sure where I am or where I'm going with it. But let me just jump into it. Is that what you meant by that?
It is, and it's also the other one that I say that helps in there that I can't take credit. It was one of the investors that I know that I like a lot. But what he basically said is it's like putting a fresh coat of paint on a dilapidated house, right? So you picture that house that's falling down, weeds overgrown, like the structure's rotting, and then someone comes and paints it all fresh coat of white and is like, ta-da! It doesn't change the underlying value, right? And that's not to say that the companies aren't valuable, but the reality is they're taking AI as a transformational technology, right? And that was kind of my analog between a rocket engine and a horse is you now have this step change that is able to do so many more things and propel you at such a different velocity. And you're putting it on something that is rate limited by four legs, right? Like it just does not make sense. And that's what's happening for a lot of companies today. It's, oh, we're using AI. And you say, great, how are you using it? And like, well, we deployed Copilot. And you're like, and what is that doing for the business? Like, so great, people ask more questions and they get a few answers. And don't get me wrong, like surfacing knowledge and allowing, your team to basically have a better intranet that they can get data from is great. But how does that improve your workflows? How does that get product out the door faster? How is that improving like your marketing, your communication? How are you, getting better performance in your formulations? Like none of that is a core workflow. And that's what the technology really should be used for. And so when you just think about how do I put this into what I do today, you'll get some gains. But if you step back and say, how do I build around this and think about what structures have to change and build from the ground up? Now you're thinking about, this true transformation. Now you're getting into exponential gains, not just these like little marginal kind of step changes.
People are fundamentally opposed to AI. The people that are anti-AI, for the most part, is because they're not sure how it's going to work. How is it going to affect me? Am I going to lose my job? Are my opportunities going to shrink? I have a college age son who's going to be a junior this year, and I'm nervous for him as to, what type of jobs, which all throughout history in the business world, you would get these sort of startup jobs, these beginning opportunities where it was a lot of research and you'd be plugging data into stuff. And that seems to be kind of a thing of the past.
A lot of it is, yeah. Yeah.
And folks akin it to, again, the analogy around the tractor versus the plow, right? Like when people were using plows and they introduced tractors back when in the 50s or whatever, 40s, people were petrified of that. Like,
Yeah.
everyone's going to lose their job, but all it did was make things bigger, quicker, easier. Talk to me about that. Like you also quoted saying almost every problem we see in AI is either a data thing or humans, rarely AI itself, right? Like, so
Yeah.
is there a problem with inputting that data? We sort of based on that? I know it's a big question. Are we based on the information that we're putting it on? Is there a data entry issue? And where do you see the folks that are doing these type of entry jobs? Where's that going?
Yeah, it's a big question. Let me break that apart a little bit. I think the first one in there, let's take the problem in AI. I think a lot of people are fascinated, especially when we sit down kind of C-suite and other things. There's the inclination for everyone to jump into what's the technology, right? We want to use AI. We're ready to deploy an AI. And I would say in 90% of the conversations that we have, I was just doing an implementation with a mid-cap, kind of consumer fashion company this week. And let's say they're 300 million in revenue, and we're sitting with their C-suite team and about to roll out several things. And in an all-day workshop, I think we talked probably the actual AI technology, maybe 30 minutes, right? The rest of it was workflows, data, people, the processes, because AI is just, it feeds on those, right? AI should follow the workflow. It should enhance and augment the humans. It's building off the data. So these aren't technology conversations typically, and technology isn't the problem, right? It breaks down because AI doesn't have clean, structured, reliable data, or because it's not getting adopted. I can give you the best technology in the world, and if it does not fit your workflow and your teams do not pick it up, it sits like the exercise bike that people start using to hang and, dry their clothes on, right, in the corner. Like it's no good, right? Like it only works if you get on and start pedaling, and AI is the same kind of way. And so a lot of what we, kind of preach to the clients and the companies, or frankly anyone who will listen, is AI has to start human-centric. So the best results are going to come from understanding what your teams are doing today, how you can make their quality of work better, their quality of life better, take off the non-value add. Now they're looking at something that they want to implement, right? Now you're getting pull. It's no different than when you're creating a product. And so that's what we talk to, especially in beauty, right? You have very consumer-centric companies, and they lose sight of that when they start talking about AI, right? It becomes this big top-down technology push instead of what are our employees, our teams looking for? What are our consumers looking for? And now how do we build that technology around that to solve that problem? And that's where you really get these like big improvements. So that's kind of like the data technology human challenge. But I think much bigger in your question, and we're not going to be able to solve all of that now or probably in the next 2 years, is really like, what does this mean at a society level? And how do we think about the future of work? How do we think about structuring value and what represents value creation, income generation? And those are going to be really big questions that society does have to answer, right? And unfortunately, right now, we're not necessarily living in a time that gives a lot of people a lot of assurance that the people that need to help answer this question are going to be able to sit down at a table and answer some really hard global geopolitical type questions, but they need to get addressed, right? Because AI does have those type of implications.
Right.
But with that said, you and I can't necessarily change that in our day to day, right? So what does that mean for us? And like you, I have a daughter who's in college, and we talk a lot about this. Like, what does that look like? She's interested in kind of environmental science and chemistry, biology, things like that. And we've had very frank conversations of a lot of those entry level chemist, biologist type roles that would have existed aren't going to be there. They're going to change, right? And so a lot of the discussions we've had is, well, how do you understand how to make sense of data, and how do you start to apply that analysis, that creativity, the policy setting, the consulting, like making sense of data, making sense of analysis that allows other people to use it in interesting ways? Because AI is really good at data. AI is much better than humans when it comes to processing, connecting ideas, dealing with vast sets of data. Where it still struggles, and will struggle for a very long time, is creative thinking, how to connect disparate ideas, how to connect ideas from different domains. Because especially when you think about LLMs, which is like ChatGPT, Claude, things like that, they're trained on a set of data. So for things that they've seen, it's pattern recognition, it's math, right? They're really good at predicting that next word, next sentence, next idea. But when you get outside of that kind of umbrella or distribution of what they've been trained on and get into the margins, where creativity really happens, they really fall apart and struggle. And that's where humans excel. And so, from kind of younger generation, that's a lot of the conversations I have with them of like, how do you think about take off the things that used to be data and, just making sense in simple analysis, assume that can all be done. Now, what do we have to do? Right? We have to get people to use things, to buy things, to change behavior, to like all of those type of activities. And that's where there's going to be kind of a whole new industries built around that. So it will definitely look different. I think the kind of new folks coming in will honestly have a bit of an easier time because there's going to be new things that are created. I think where there's a lot more risk are for kind of mid-level senior executives that their landscape is changing overnight, right? What it means to be a director of a consumer products company today, or a health and wellness company, versus what it is going to mean to be a director or a VP or CEO in 3 years is fundamentally different. And the skill sets they have are not the skill sets that they're going to need for the future. And there is needs to be a very deliberate and kind of mad dash to be able to close that gap, or else the companies are in trouble, the leaders are in trouble.
Well put. And that deep dive, alleviates, of course, some of the pressures on me to explain this as my son, like your daughter, asked me questions. And I'm like, even you who are an expert at it, you just don't know what's through that next door, right? Until we
I mean, it's going so fast, right?
Yeah.
Like at the most simple level, what I've told my kids at the base level is find things you're interested in, right? Ideally, those aren't going to be things like photography that like I can just generate, right? Or a data analyst and you're like, oh, I'm really excited about doing Excel pivot tables because guess what? Like I can't help you much. But find the things that you're interested in and then have an insatiable appetite for learning.
Yeah.
Because if you continue to learn and you are intellectually malleable and adaptable, like these become your tools to get better. And at least for the foreseeable future, industries are going to be in massive phases of change, and they need people who can help them navigate from what we did last year and 10 years ago into what we need to do in the next 10 years. And so I kind of call them translators, right? It's like people who understand technology well enough to understand what you can do with it and also understand the business and the commercial aspects that go on to translate back and then help make those solutions. At the end of the day, it's, where I spend most of my time.
And the solutions for those Chaz are probably different, right? Because like
For
just
sure.
for my company alone, right? And we've had this discussion, but you know, we're gonna tie AI into our marketing strategy. We're gonna tie it into our sales team strategy. It's gonna help us with operations and warehousing and footprint sizes and all that stuff that's kind of goes around those mechanical sort of like you mentioned before. There's a certain amount of creativity that the sales and marketing team have to do, but to fill in those blanks is where we're going to engage in. That is where we see it going. You've said that there are some brands that should build their own models, and there are others that maybe get something off the shelf, right? Everybody doesn't have the same amount of support financially that an Estée Lauder or a L'Oreal does, right? So what are these small and mid-sized companies like? What's the first move? What do they do? Like, where do they find access?
Yeah, it's a great question. I'll rephrase it a little bit because I think there's a few things in there that you're also touching on that are really important to kind of unpack. I think the first question that a lot of people ask is like, do small companies still have a chance? Do big companies like who wins, right? And I don't think it is determined yet. At the end of the day, big companies have an advantage because they have more capital and they have more data. And AI takes both of those in different amounts to be successful. But most of them are moving incredibly slow. And so that opens the gates for smaller, more nimble companies to think about how to close that gap and get ahead before the bigger companies kind of lumber their way through it, right? And so we actually have probably done more of our work with mid-sized companies because they are just moving faster. They recognize there is basically an existential threat that if they don't get ahead of this, they will kind of be squeezed out in that process by these like AI native companies coming up and by big companies, L'Oreal, Lauder just outspending them in that race. But what they do have is the ability to go really fast, make decisions, and learn in the way that AI learns, because most big companies are still in these like quarterly planning cycles, annual phases. But AI is like these small, quick sprints, right? And the smaller mid-cap companies are just are better built for that, right? In terms of their structure. So I think that's the first thing. I think one of the other really important things is there's no such thing as a single AI transformation, and there's no such thing as like the one intelligence, right? And a lot of companies are still approaching AI like it is SAP or some other big enterprise tool. It is adapted and has to be adapted to what I'm doing specifically. And that's what I think a lot of mid caps and smaller companies have an advantage in because they don't and are not locked into all of these big systems. And they're able to say, okay, how do we think about this from the ground up? And if we were willing to rethink our workflows to get the most out of this technology, what can we go do? And that's really what they're accelerating into. And now that we've kind of crossed this bridge or starting point, whatever we want to think about it, a lot of AI used to be we talk to people and they're like, oh yeah, we're running Copilot. And you're like, again, great. What is that doing for you? But that's because their businesses didn't really understand how to engage with AI, right? So it was like just fancy ChatGPT type sets. With the advance of the agentic and the agents, that's what businesses are getting value from, right? That's the unlock of how do I now start to embed this into my workflows? How do I have this take over things that my teams are like just drowning in? And I can give some great examples. And then how do you start to get much deeper insights into what we're doing. And you were talking a little bit about that of, your company and how you're using it in sales strategy and in opening warehouses and inventory management. The ability to now look across the business, and we were just actually talking to a company this morning about this. Their data was in, I have SAP, I have Shopify, I have, some inventory, my sales data, and they did reporting on all of that, but there was no place it all came together. There was no place that could look across and say, what's happening from my promotions and my LTV, and how is that connected to the activity my sales people are doing in the field versus what's happening in my e-com, and how do I need to think about now my inventory obsolescence levels, right? Or inventory levels to minimize obsolescence, and now give me that in one set of insights. That's what you can now do. And that's what you can do in asking very simple questions of, hey, I'm curious how my promotions are working. How are they connected to the LTV, and which promotions are driving the biggest AOV and LTV for my business? Like historically, that would have been weeks of Excel work to be
Right.
able to put that together. We can run that in 2 minutes right now with a data analyst agent. It's those kind of unlocks that now businesses can really think about driving the right decisions, right time, right place. And they don't have to think about scaling as just like throw more hours and more people at that, but it's how do we do more value add work and allow, agents and technology to take care of the rest. So long answer to your question, but a few important things in there.
The great part about that too is, this tool gives these smaller brands or mid-sized brands the opportunity to compete with the big dogs.
100%. It's a David and Goliath moment if they take it.
Yeah.
100%.
Interesting. I wanted to ask you about, historically, the more authentic a brand or the more in touch with the community a brand gets, the better they do, right? People are eager to tie on with the company that they feel this authenticity with, and their messaging, and there's a creative aspect that ties into that. Do you think AI hurts that? Do you think AI makes it much more robotic, and people will be like, you hear all the time now, that model's AI generated, that actress is AI generated, that had that singer that was completely AI generated. Are people going to second guess, like, this is BS, this is AI bullshit?
I mean, I think yes, right? Like I think we all look at content right now and we laugh when you can tell it's directly ChatGPT with, the M dashes and the short forward sentences. So I think there is going to be a greater sense of skepticism. I think there will be a higher value placed on real thought, real human thought, right? And that's not to say that human thought can't be encouraged and engaged with AI, but if you're paying me for consulting and I simply give you back a ChatGPT response, like why did we just
Yes.
engage in that process, right? But what that allows me to do in that same example is I can now pressure test my thinking. I have access to a world of data at my fingertips that didn't exist before to be able to actually help you hone your process much better than I could have before with these tools, right? So I think that sense of authenticity is still going to be important, but I think the definition of a brand changes, right? So I think AI gives opportunities to get deeper engagement with consumers that didn't exist before. If you were a retailer and you had people just walking in, you can now use this technology in ways to engage them, to identify, to understand the patterns, to predict the things that they want, and make this feel like this bespoke experience was all built for Chaz walking in the door. That's an amazing win, right, for your consumer and for your brand, if you use it right. But it also has the ability to just be a really bad chatbot that you throw up, and now it like feels creepy and like invasive, and you erode brand value in that situation. So it doesn't change the nature of the game, which is you have to understand your consumer, you have to understand the tenets of your brand, and you should be applying that technology against the things that make you special. And if that was consumer engagement and, customer service, then there are so many ways you could deploy this technology if you were the Four Seasons, right? Or the Ritz, to create even richer experiences than you could before, but you have to do it right.
Yeah. And as you're saying it, I'm thinking in my brain too, like sampling programs, things that we do fulfillment and
Absolutely.
distribution on, like that could all be tied into this.
Absolutely. Right. And I mean, and you think about that in your business, right? Obviously, how you optimize your fulfillment, how you think about logistics and distribution, how you think about, the ultimately the brand is looking for a return on those sampling programs. So how do you make it feel 100% bespoke, built for me, but do that at a mass scale? Right? Like that's what this technology opens up. And so there are definitely opportunities for it, but it's like everything, right? If I'm using social media and I'm trying to connect and drive my e-com and I put out generic social media pieces to try to drive my IG page and like, my conversion's not working. Like, no shit, it sucks, right? Like you're doing it poorly. So it's the same concept, in that process. It's just much bigger, much more transformative across kind of all variables instead of just like one in the business.
Yeah, I mean, you mentioned retail, and on a retail end of things, right? Like it's going to help with product development. It's going to help that supply chain, shrinking the, rush to market,
Absolutely.
cutting down on that amount of time. And then, just to bring up things like TikTok Shop and, this home shopping network and all these sort of online selling tools, right? That people are, they're not just now getting into it. They're really diving into this because they know there's a retail end of things. And then there's this online end of things, right?
Yeah.
And people engage in e-com with that all the time. But like any, besides, sort of faster trend cycles and stuff like that, is there anything that pops into your brain that like really will engage these TikTok shops of the world when they tie in with AI?
People are much more comfortable engaging with technology, right, than they ever have been. And so the idea that you can extend yourself through really smart avatars, through really smart conversations, through really smart video, I think has been demonstrated. That's what I think this starts to open up, because the rate limiter on anything like TikTok shops is me as an individual. How much content can I produce? How many languages can I produce that in what ways can I personalize that? Right. So if I'm, kind of TikTok shop and let's say it's in sporting goods and I'm trying to, kind of take, maybe it's a recovery supplement or something like that. And I can customize that to people who are in basketball versus triathlons versus jujitsu versus whatever else it may be. The ability to take that one piece of content I create and then tweak it to now make that 16 pieces of like highly tailored content to drive, like now you have a really interesting way to give scale to something that was rate limited by your hours, your ability to show up on camera. So I think it's like, it's some of those pieces that really help. I think the other thing is obviously in the data models, right? Of understanding what's actually moving, how do you measure these things? I think definitely goes full circle. I think the bigger opportunity are for, the specialty multi-retailers, the big retailers, the big boxes out there that are sitting on top of so much data. And, we've done work in past lives for, one of the two biggest specialty multi-companies and retailers out there. And it was amazing and embarrassing at the same time how much data they had and how much data they did not understand how to use. And so I think this is where the real opportunity is for everyone. If they wake up and figure out how to actually take advantage of that and, get out of these loyalty programs that are basically like, oh, people like you bought this, or like people who also bought this, like you have so much data to now think about connecting, and how do you connect that to the other things I do in my life and get beyond like these superficial attributes. You can make my shopping experience feel as if it is with a concierge and completely bespoke. Like you're sitting on tens of millions of loyalty members with, hundreds and hundreds of transactions to still have these kind of incredibly antiquated shopping models and algorithms is kind of embarrassing. And so that's, for them a huge opportunity, and for their competitors an even bigger opportunity to figure out how do they start to build some of those models and kind of compete and steal people away in that process. And that gets you into some of the, kind of AIO or GAO, however you want to think about it, and kind of what shopping and e-com involved in AI looks like.
I feel like the honeymoon stage for ROI on, the AI, at least on my end, is coming to a close, right? Because up until now, our usage of any kind of AI functionality, whether it's with a client or internally with ourselves, the answer ultimately was, this is new. We're going to give it a shot. Let's see how this works. And then we'll reassess. And then that reassessment comes and we didn't really look at the details specifically enough. So do you think that's true? Do you think like people are going to start saying like, if I'm going to spend this money, if I'm going to hire somebody to help me, if I'm going to get a consultant, if I'm going to bring in all the equipment and everything I need to build this thing, I'm going to need to know that I'm going to make this money back.
Yeah, I mean, I hope it does come true, and I hope it is coming to an end, because it's bad for business. It's bad for people like me, in all respects, because how we differentiate and why I'm better at what I do than most anyone else is we actually understand how to get results, right? So if you're not measuring that, then how do I separate myself from everyone else who's, just playing in hype, right? So selfishly, I hope it does come to an end. But more importantly, I think that is symptomatic of a bigger problem, right? And that bigger problem is back to what we described. Most leaders and companies don't understand enough about the technology and don't have people around them to help them understand what they should be doing, how they start, how they measure,
Bingo.
because it is, there should be no experimentation in this is important, right? So me giving AI tools and supporting my teams who say, hey, we want to come back and use this. I may not know the direct ROI on that right out of the gates, but I do know that my team's becoming more proficient in how to use this technology is going to benefit me, right? So like that type of experiment, yes. Do I know there's going to be a failure rate? Absolutely. It's a new technology. Being on the leading edge means you're going to fail, but it also means you're going to hit it in some of these. And when you hit it, you're thinking about this like a venture capitalist. I may lose 9 times in these experiments, but that one time that I hit, I'm going to have 1,000x return on what I'm doing. And it covers by far every single one of those 9 losses. And so there is a slightly different mentality, right, that we think about in these kind of early stage technologies. But when, as I said, we were just running this kind of workshop in use cases for one of our clients. There were 3 columns as we took them through. We had spent a few weeks interviewing and mapping all the workflows, which comes back to your question of where should companies get started? You start by understanding what data you have, what are the friction points, what are the workflows, and then you figure out how you're going to prioritize that roadmap. What are you solving for? What is the ROI? And I bring this up because there were 3 columns in the table that I was taking them through. The first one was use case. They were grouped, so 4, right? Grouping, this is production, this is marketing, whatever. There was the use case, like we want to use this technology to, improve our inventory forecasting, right? As an example, use case. There's a friction point. Right now, our teams are doing this manual and we have, this kind of obsolescence rate that we think we can improve. And then there was a business impact. How are we measuring this use case? Right? And sometimes it's going to be operational efficiency. Sometimes it's going to be scale. Sometimes that's going to be dollars, right? Like there's lots of ways that gets measured. But if you don't understand what you're measuring, not only is it bad for the business, but how do you optimize the technology? AI is a learning system, right? If you don't know what you're trying to do, how do you tell it if it's learning? Like, how do you teach it? Right? And so like it's a problem all around. And so we do need to get out of that stage and we do need to get to results driven. But at the same time, we should not look at every single experiment that we do as if this does not have a clear payout day one, we're never going to experiment, because then you're never going to find these breakouts, right? So there does need to be some flexibility, but we should be measuring, and we should also be looking at that to say, because AI is different than enterprise, we should not be running 18-month cycles and then say, did this work? This should be a 6-week sprint, measure, 6 weeks, measure, right? So we should have these iterative cycles where we are also matching our relative investment. But a lot of challenges I see happening, especially with a lot of the big consulting firms that are coming in, it's, a 12-month project, 24-month project, millions of dollars, companies are locking in, and they're kind of shooting themselves in the foot from getting a return, getting actual value out of the AI. Like nobody is measuring this along the way. And it kind of goes back into the, that SAP consultant black hole that every CEO was loath to ever have to drive through, right?
Folks, if you're listening to this episode and you hear these words that Chaz is saying and you're nodding along like I am, you're absolutely, illuminating everything that I've had questions on. You're doing such a great job about it. I apologize for my, my minimal knowledge about it and throwing these questions.
No, but that's exactly where people are, right?
But he's the guy to talk to. Chaz, if somebody wants to get a hold of you at Alita Labs, what's the best way to do that?
Yeah, a few ways. So you can find me on LinkedIn, Chaz.Giles. You can Chaz at alitalabs.ai. You can find me on IG, ChazGiles.ai. So I'm not too hard to find in that sense.
Well, we appreciate you joining in here today on Minutes with Mike, and we look forward to seeing you again soon.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me. It was a pleasure.